So welcome everyone, whether you're here very promptly live or if you're going to be watching this on a replay later. We're here again with dnaPower, and today I am joined by both Jolia Fung, who is a holistic nutritionist and also the partnership manager at dnaPower, and then again Dr. Lois Naherney, and she's been here before and done a webinar for us already, so some of you might recognize her. Today, they're back to talk about identifying genes that impact women's health, fertility, and menopause. And this is a topic that we've been getting a lot of questions about recently, specifically around what kind of testing to be able to offer in your practice. Recently, we had a webinar on methylation, and there were lots of questions around that. So I think this is a super timely webinar, and I think there's going to be a lot of good information for you folks to take away. So in this webinar, you'll all be learning DNA 101, as they call it. So the applications of DNA testing for nutrition, fitness, and for health. Genetic testing factors that impact weight maintenance and insulin sensitivity for ovarian function and individual metabolism in menopause. Some genetic variations that are related to methylation, as I said, and how that affects women's health. How to identify genetic predispositions and then implement specific nutrition plans to support those methylation pathways. And then lastly, how to mitigate inflammatory factors effectively using genetic data to improve fertility outcomes and reduce menopausal symptoms. So helping women all the way through their lifespan. So thank you, Jolia. Thank you, Lois, for being here again. Jolia, I know you have a little bit to share, do a bit of an introduction for those who don't know you two, and then we'll get right into the topic for today.
Great. Thank you so much for the introduction, Veronica. Thank you for joining us here today. My name is Jolia, and I am a holistic nutritionist. I graduated from the Institute of Holistic Nutrition in 2017. So hello, fellow nutritionists. So very, very happy to be here with Dr. Lois Naherney today to be sharing more insights about how you can leverage the power of DNA testing in your practice to really understand your clients' foundational health and foundational kind of blueprint into what would actually impact their hormones and other influences on women's health, fertility, and menopause. Big topics that we're all really interested to learn more about and how we can really enhance and optimize our health with. So really excited to get started. I'd love to introduce you guys to Dr. Lois Naherney, CEO of dnaPower, and we'll get started right away.
Great. Thank you so much. I'm delighted to be here, and welcome to those watching and joining us now, and to those who will be joining later and on a recorded version. So this is an amazing topic because we just, who doesn't know somebody in their network that has not had or having some issues regarding their hormones, fertility, in my generation, menopause, etc. And it's complex. It's not a super simple issue. And how do you solve that? We know diet is a critical way that you can have an impact, but how do you know which diet to use? And then how do you deal with all of the multifaceted impacts around how inflammation can play a role genetically, how hormones can play a part, how methylation, which you heard about recently, also play a role? Well, there are genetics involved in every one of those areas, and depending on where you've got variations can impact which area will be more important to support in terms of protocols and diet and practices. And so that's what we're going to deep dive into here today. And I'll look forward to any questions that you have at the end. So what we want to look at is how common genetic variations can help you navigate client diets and the protocols when it comes to women's health. And so what DNA testing can do is provide really foundational insight to genetic variations that contribute to these health risks and hormonal imbalances. And it really can transform health. I really can't think of any other testing that you can do that will give you so much insight into what might be the underlying causes for women who are having hormonal and other issues. So as Veronica mentioned, we're going to cover a number of things off just around some of the health issues, DNA 101, genetic factors that impact diet and weight, which then contribute to hormones, looking at very specific genetic variations around carbohydrate metabolism, insulin sensitivity, how that impacts hormones, ovarian function, individual metabolism. We'll look at inflammation, methylation, and a couple of other areas just to understand what you can learn and how you can use that. So, if you think about what are the most common women's health reasons that people come to see you, I'm assuming that a lot come to see you, whether it's about weight gain or loss. Problems with periods seem to be epidemic right now, about being irregular, missing, inconsistent, painful, or heavy. Many women suffer hormone fluctuations, infertility, menopause symptoms, inflammation, fatigue, and gut issues. So I'm guessing some portion of those show up in terms of the people that you see. We know weight is having a super big impact overall. And so we know that in 60% of women, in general, when you survey a large number, believe that they're too heavy or self-conscious. And when you've got a weight issue, it can contribute to hormonal changes, and vice versa. Hormones can contribute to creating a weight issue. And so weight, as we know, can contribute to many other factors, such as excess weight, cardiovascular disease, type 2 diabetes, osteoporosis, pain, and genetics can play a role in that. And if you can kind of dial back and figure out where some of the source of the issue is, it can make a big difference again in how you treat people. Fertility, we're hearing a lot more about it. On average, 1 in 5 couples, 1 in 6 couples will experience infertility, and it can take 5 or 6 months to get pregnant. That's a big issue. Women want support in being able to help get pregnant. And hormonal imbalances impact people at all stages of life. So up to 30% of women experience heavy menstrual bleeding. Up to 25% experience absent or infrequent periods. 5 to 10% of women have PCOS. And, really, you're looking at huge numbers of women that have issues with perimenopause and menopause and really can affect their life. So clearly a big issue. And if you can play a role supporting that, it can make a big difference. And the solutions can be both complex and simple, many related to lifestyle and daily health. So we can do something about it. So a little bit about my story I've mentioned before, but I have suffered with all of these issues, which got me into this business. So I had fertility issues. I wasn't able to get pregnant. I tried in vitro twice. I tried 10 rounds of insemination, didn't get pregnant. I became an adoptive mom, changed my life. And it's been an amazing experience, but it was a pretty hard process going through infertility. I had such extreme periods. My uterus would actually fall out of my body. I would have profuse bleeding and honestly hardly be able to stem the bleeding, which create huge anemia and real iron problems and lots of other issues. But it was just horrific. I did have fibroids. I ended up with a fibroid embolization surgery. I had weight that had gained. I was chronically tired, had restless leg syndrome. So it just goes on and on. So I am one of those women that was really out there trying to find answers. And it was when I got my DNA done that I discovered I've got an MTHFR, a methylation, and vitamin B issue. And I thought, wow, I wonder if I have got deficiencies. So I started taking vitamin Bs. I have to take them every day, and I'm perfectly healthy and have never been healthier in my life. And it was that simple, but I just didn't know that. And none of the doctors I went to see suggested that as an issue. So I ended up becoming fascinated with genetics when I adopted identical twins from Vietnam. I did the testing, curious about their health, not expecting to learn about mine. Interestingly, at age 3 was one of my daughters asked me why she wasn't my son. And one of my daughters came out as male and is transgender, and we love him and support him fully. But it's been a fascinating journey to look at how you can have identical genetics, but how lifestyle, or epigenetics can play an influence, and how chemistry and other things can cause a shift. And so it's, again, been a journey that I've been on for over 20 years, really trying to understand genetics and epigenetics and how it has an impact. So this is actually my family, and you can see that, you inherit different genetics from mom and dad. What did you inherit from yours, and what did you pass on? Well, I ended up inheriting from my dad the genetic weakness in vitamin Bs and lactose, because when I cut lactose out, I lost the weight I gained. And you can see my blonde, blue-haired sister here who is struggling with some of the weight and diabetes issues that my mother had and really struggles with carbs and fats. And so even though you know your family history, you sometimes really do have to dive into how the genetics were passed on to really understand what you need to focus on specifically. So again, the DNA testing can really provide insights into that hormonal health and many other risks. So a quick DNA 101, just to remind you, you are unique, but only 0.2%. And that's what we really study around the genetic variations. And so that is the part that we look at, and we really focus on the aspects of DNA that you can do something about and that really can impact your day-to-day health and lifestyle. So what we look at is we have variations called SNPs, or single nucleotide polymorphisms. We study those, and we know through research studies that if you have certain variations can lead to certain health risks or issues, or a predisposition to a particular health issue. So that's what we're studying. And we know when people have those variations that they can be more inclined. And if we know what they are, you'll know where to be focused. So these SNPs occur once every 300 to 1,000 nucleotides on average. We've got 3 billion nucleotides. So we've got about 3 to 10 million SNPs or differences each. And that's what we're looking at. The SNPs are like a typo. They can change the meaning a little or a lot. With minimal effect, maybe it's blue eyes or brown eyes. Instead of the cat ran after the mouse, if it was the rat ran after the mouse, maybe somebody can do lactose or not do lactose. And then here where you have a deletion, sometimes you can get quite sick. It kind of scrambles the code and you can get quite more significant issues that arise. And so we're just seeing, again, which variations do we have? We study and report on the common ones. But the important thing about DNA is that you can influence it through lifestyle choices. It's like an on-off switch or a dimmer switch, and that's methylation plays a really big role in that. So it's not your destiny. It's the choices that you make and layer on top of your DNA that can change how your genes are expressed. And so there are many important epigenetic factors, diet being an absolutely critical one, exercise, vitamins, sleep, stress, toxins, all of those things are super important. And so you want to be sure that you are focusing on a number of those as you work with some of your clients. So nutrigenomics is the study of how individual genetic variation affects a person's response to nutrients and the impacts or the risk of nutrition-related chronic disease. And so a big portion of what we look at is nutrigenomics. And so women's health starts with nutrition, and it needs to work with the body, not against it. And so genetic variations can determine which diet is more likely to support good health and proper weight. Now, I covered some of these the last time, so I'm not going to spend a lot of time on it. But what we can see is here's two different reports. Green is good, red is bad. And you can see there's a cluster of red here around fats. And over here, it's very green around fats. At the top, it's red here, and that one's carbohydrates. What that means is these two different women, both trying to lose weight, they were actually using the wrong diets. And the woman here has good carb genes and poor fat genes, so can do a higher carb, low fat diet. And this particular woman has poor carb genes and good fat genes and should be doing really a higher fat and lower carb diet. When you align that and you know that for a person, you now can really support them in helping identify the diets that's right and really can create a difference for them. So that's kind of a starting point. So if you don't put on weight, then you're not going to be fighting a number of other things that go with it. We know lactose and gluten can contribute. Most often diets just pull it out because they don't know if it's a problem or not. Only 25 to 35% of the population have the genes to process lactose. And so do you have it or don't you have it? A lot of gluten intolerances can be acquired, but maybe they've got some of the variations. We can actually see if they've got the celiac variation or some other more subtle variations on gluten. Those can create to weight gain and inflammation. And so if you could know that, you can design a much better diet to avoid weight, which can, again, contribute to hormone problems. So how can we provide this targeted support to help women manage hormonal transitions in their life? So if we look at fertility and period symptoms, a major area we look at in genetic variations is carbohydrate metabolism and insulin sensitivity. So they can play a big role in how you manage weight and blood sugar. And they can also affect ovulation, ovarian function, hormonal balance, and female fertility. If you have high insulin levels, we know that can lead to PCOS and ovulation disorders. So if you see someone with that, they need to work on a diet quickly, or there can be very compounding issues that can arise for them. And then they start to try to solve the PCOS issue, but it's actually maybe related to something else. And then understanding, if you know what the genetics are, it'll help you target where you should be focused to really improve the outcomes. Perimenopause and menopause are also influenced by these particular gene variations. And it's compounded because declining estrogen levels can lead to weight gain, especially around the abdomen, and are impacted, again, by these shifts in the hormones in the body. The carbohydrate metabolism and insulin sensitivity can also play a role in the weight at this time. And so when you know their individual genetic response, you can help avoid and design diets that will help to balance this out a little bit more quickly for them. So here's an example of what we might see. So if we saw this result for a client, we would see, okay, there's some pretty heavy redness going on here in the carbohydrates, maybe a little bit of flags on insulin. Fat's not so bad. Protein looks like it could be important, but they put weight on with a protein response. We go back, and what you can do is dive in as a practitioner and look at the results at the back and drill down and say, I see some specific poor genes here. And we know through research, specific genes actually have got some targeted actions that can be taken to support them. What we provide in the information is here, if these are red, here are the generalized things you can be able to do. So carbohydrates, you want to have low glycemic or lower carb diet, whole fruits, veggies, grain, beans, lentils, legumes. Avoid processed carbohydrates because it can contribute to weight and health issues. I know you'd know that as a nutritionist or dietitian, but it's in the report, and the clients can read and see this. It's not them, it's there in writing, which actually helps them take it in sometimes a little bit better. Here we get some coaching for them on protein need. However, the protein weight response, there's a particular gene that can cause weight to go on with too much protein. So they've got to balance more easily digestible proteins in this additional protein balance to be healthy. So there's lots of information you can learn from that report on how do you manage carbohydrates and insulin, and if you get that in balance, will support the overall hormones. But you can really dive into these carbohydrate genes and these insulin genes in a little bit more detail in order to understand specifically some more specific diet protocols that can support them. And so here, if we look at a particular gene called PPARG, it's associated with increased risk of progressing from impaired glucose tolerance to type 2 diabetes. And research shows it's mitigated by exercise. And so if you see someone has a variation, what you want to be doing is recommending they have more complex carbs, because they can't deal with the highly processed ones very easily. It'll just really convert to weight gain, and a more regular exercise routine. So you've now got some very specific recommendations. IGF-1 is quite a common variation for people. It causes lower insulin-like growth factor 1 and increased risk of insulin resistance. So ways you can naturally increase IGF-1, higher protein diet, some resistance training, weight training, and some of the HIIT workouts. And so there's some really good specifics that you would not be able to know if you saw someone who you just know seems to be having some blood sugar or insulin issues. Another one here, NADSIN-1. It's around dietary protein and insulin levels. There's good research that shows there's greater positive changes in regulation with insulin in response to high protein diet. At least 25% of energy is derived from protein, especially if obese. So again, you've got some very specific recommendations that you can provide. Another one is called FTO, and it's in our BMI panel, and it's the nickname, the Fatso gene. And there seems to be a point in history where people inherited this gene because it actually helped them stave off starvation when there was famines and food shortages. So great gene to have inherited to make you, for you to be alive today, but not so good in an era of highly accessible food. And so with this gene, If you've got variations, a high protein diet, again, is important. Decreasing saturated fat is really important, and increasing your exercise. And so similar to some of those other genes that we just looked at. But in fact, here's an example from one of the research studies. So they did a 2-year percent change in total fat loss on a low or high protein diet. And so when they did a study, the people who had that variation, that poor variation with that FTO gene, over time, and that 2 years, lost 2 times more weight on a high protein diet, because that was the diet that was working with their body. And so we're getting more and more nutrigenomic studies now that are showing you should never actually do a food study without knowing somebody's genetics going into it, or else you're simply going to get the results of the frequency of the variations in the population. So virtually every food study going forward should know what it's trying to look for and what are the genetic variations that someone might possess, to know whether vitamin Bs, let's say if taking supplements support them, or if doing a high protein diet will support weight loss in this case. And so here we see the people that have, this is a low protein diet, a high protein diet, they lost just, again, this 2 times more weight because they had the variation that really needed that high protein. So again, just such good information to have. So that's just a little bit around some of the things on, weight, protein diets, etc. Now we want to look at inflammation and how it can play a role in women's health and menopause. So we'll just sort of shift a little bit. And so inflammation, again, plays a big part. And for women of reproductive age, inflammation can affect ovulation and hormone production. Not a surprise, I hope. And menopause actually prompts an innate immune inflammatory response in the female reproductive organs. And that inflammation response can not only affect, again, this hot flash and all the other problems, but it can expand and spread to the brain, which makes the brain more susceptible to ischemic damage or stroke and Alzheimer's. So this is pretty important stuff. If someone is going into menopause and has high inflammation markers, being able to take care of that and be conscious about it is pretty important. So in the inflammatory panels that we look at, genetic variations such as IL-6, interleukin 6, and TNF-A alpha are higher in women with endometriosis. So interesting, they study the endometriosis and then they look and say, oh, interesting, all of these women have higher markers in that. Okay, what if we could do it the other way around and say, oh, you've got high markers on IL-6 and TNF-A, what can we do to help you prevent endometriosis and other issues? So really, again, that's part of the goal that we're looking for. So in this case, we see someone has very high inflammatory markers. We see they have moderate and poor genes related to IL-6. And so, the recommendations in the report will say you are at higher risk of ongoing or chronic inflammation. You can boost your immune response by vitamin C, foods, turmeric, garlic, onion, berries, and fish oil in the diet. Physical activity also boosts this IL-6 performance. Wonderful information, especially for a woman going into menopause, to be able to understand that link and be more proactive if they have these genes. And so, knowing that you've got a factor, it would be lovely to be able to prevent some of those issues. Looking at another element of inflammation, we know foods can be inflammatory. And when you see results like this, where there's so many inflammatory markers on some of the food tolerance areas of alcohol, caffeine, gluten, lactose, salt, and sugar, we can see many moderate and poor results here in the genes. That's somebody who needs to eat a much cleaner diet, or else there's going to be a problem. So many recommendations are provided here. We know the specific genes that we're looking at. Interestingly, these HLA genes, which we link to gluten, the first one is highly correlated with celiac. And so 95% of celiac sufferers have this particular HLA. The first, there's a gene number, a SNP number beside it, have that variation. Then some might have more gluten issues with the DQ8, and then it's the more mild gluten intolerance around the DQ 2.2. We know people with the MCM6 genetic variation really struggle to digest lactose, and we'll find more issues in the diet. And so knowing that, again, you're better able to recommend. In addition, another part of this whole inflammation story is vitamins. And if a person has a lot of variations on the critical vitamins related to anti-inflammatory support in the body, then that also can create a contributor to the inflammation problem. So if we see that these are very red, and there's quite a few here that are red in this person's vitamin panel, they need quite a bit of supplement and food support. We can look then at vitamins C and D and omegas, which all support inflammation, and talk about which foods that they can be improving in their diet to, again, fight the inflammation or the markers that they might have in other areas, and how they can really boost maybe as well through supplementation through a number of these things here. So again, a much more specific diet that you're able to work with. Here you can just see, you can go and dive into the genes on the, let's say the SLCs, where you see more poors. Here's a methylation gene, MTHFR, which is poor. We now know there's going to be some problems in that methylation process. And so support is going to be needed on a number of fronts. So moving now from inflammation, we looked at sort of the insulin sensitivity into inflammation. Now we're looking at hormones. And so genetic variations in hormones can reduce the body's ability to synthesize, metabolize, or eliminate hormones, which can lead to imbalances affecting periods, fertility, and hormonal issues. So if we see someone with a panel like this, very red, we know there's going to be some challenges. So, for example, in my era, everybody went on birth control. Well, the problem if you've got a profile like this is you can't actually, the body isn't effectively regulating those hormones, and they aren't metabolizing it and eliminating it. And you get the puffy breasts or irregular periods. And, for me, that's a little bit of part of the problem I had big fertility issues. And so if you know that person is going to have to go on a much cleaner diet. They can't have hormones in their meat and dairy. They've got to be careful of herbicides and pesticides because it overreacts in their body. Their body can't handle it. And you need to be careful on which foods, non-starchy, good quality proteins, antioxidant supplementation, and, just again, this good antioxidant diet, vitamin B complexes, manganese, other things are just really important. And so you get these deeper dives as well into which genes are a problem, and can you do more specific things to avoid this hormonal imbalance, the estrogen dominance, or increased PCOS risk. What you can do as a nutritionist is if you see a panel that's really red like this, you now go, oh, okay, you have some issues on hormone regulation. This is where I would refer somebody to a naturopath and say, go and get the Dutch, maybe go get the Dutch hormone tests, see if you're estrogen dominant, see how your androgens are doing, see how that balance works. You can validate that one quite well through another secondary test, but you've now know why you're sending them for that and why, because those tests are quite expensive, and often people are just kind of shooting in the dark on it. So here we can see there's a whole bunch of important genes related to hormones. Some are so powerful. This SRD gene, 1,000-fold increase in this activity is seen in the ovarian follicle of women with PCOS. That's pretty shocking. And so if you see that, you'd say, that person needs to be aware that this could become a problem. And you can, if you've got something like issues with the superoxide dismutase 2 gene, the risk of oxidative damage, which impacts organs and tissues and can then generate other disease, so that's what oxidative damage does, is really increased among premenopausal women with an inflammatory diet and lifestyle. And so you're now setting yourself up for chronic disease if you're not aware of where you've got some gene variations and what could play a role in your health. So that's taking a look at hormones. Now we're going to take a look at methylation. So just trying again to show you that there's so much information that you can dive into. And again, I'm not aware of any other way you can find out this much specific information. So methylation is one of those super tricky things. And every time you Google it to ask for an explanation, it doesn't really get any simpler. It just keeps being really complex. So it's one of those processes that you can dive in deeply or just trust that the experts really understand it and that you need to pay attention to it. And if there's variations, you can do something about it. So again, methylation is a chemical reaction that attaches a methyl group to DNA. So it directly has a result, an impact on your DNA, and it controls whether that DNA expression goes on or off, and or modulates up or down. And what you want is again, methylating of your good genes and downregulating of the bad genes. And so this proper methylation is critical for normal cellular function. It can affect homocysteine levels, chronic fatigue, mood disorders, neurodegeneration, diabetes, aging, heart disease, cancer. There's just so many things it can do. And there's many mechanisms that can control turning these mechanisms on and off. And again, if you can work those properly or understand where the issues are, you can try to avoid some of the methylation mutations that really impact hormonal imbalances. So you can get hormonal imbalances, really this estrogen dominant women in these cycles, and that really can predispose you to cancer and other issues over time. So this is one of the critical methylation processes affecting the folate cycle and pathway and the methionine pathway and cycle. And there's many steps where folic acid comes in. It's the folate pathway, converts to folic acid, moves through a number of these genes, needing B2. There's many cofactors, integrating this 5-MTHF, leading in through into this methionine, creating SAMe. It links into COMT, and has a homocysteine cycle that now circles through. So anyway, lots of different processes occur. There are a number of critical genes that are involved in all of these cycles. And so the DNA testing will look at each one of those and how the person is set up. We actually isolate that section gene by gene because it was easier to try to figure out from a methylation perspective which one you needed to be focused on. And so they tend to be heavily related to vitamin Bs. And these Bs are so critical to proper health, hormones, et cetera. Again, it's my issue, so I tend to spend a lot of time on it. And so with the first couple of genes, it's B12, the first three. Then it can be folate and B9 into, again, this into the 5-MTH and 10. And how effectively you metabolize folate, again, both of these. And then this links into homocysteine. And homocysteine levels are really important because if they get too high, it's toxic. And so you don't want too much toxicity related to that, and you've got to be able to manage that down. And so again, these are all the processes that you're trying to manage linked into these genes. You don't really have to know them all. You just need to know what can you do about it. And so when you have poor methylation, we talked about what are some of the things that can be generated. You can get depression, poor cellular repair, chemical sensitivities, low energy, poor immunity, hormonal balance. Like, it's one of those impossible things to figure out if you go to see a doctor, because it just impacts so much of your health overall. It can lead to inflammation, etc. So if these things get out of balance and you end up with high homocysteine levels, as well as low folic acid, we know through studies that this can link to recurrent miscarriage. And so you want to be sure that, if someone is trying to get pregnant, this is one of those things that you could be looking at if you are supporting someone in that area. And so looking at, what does the impacts of this on fertility, it can affect tissue growth and cellular development. It can affect miscarriage and miscarriages, risk of miscarriages, and neural tube defect. So methylation, critical to the fertility cycles. Also critical on menopause, because if the homocysteine gets too high, it can lead to this endothelial dysfunction, the blood clotting, immune response, electrolyte balance, and then you can get heart disease. It can also, if you are, targeting that metabolism, help prevent the decline in endothelial function. And really, this whole methylation process is just critical to clear homocysteine overall. So again, complicated, and yet if you can just figure out where the issues are, then you already know what you should be doing. So here's an example of somebody's methylation. It's actually not the worst. It's about average. We can see which ones are moderate or poor. Moderate just means, well, you probably got some function, but it can regulate up or down. The poor is probably where you want to focus a little bit more. Recommendations are provided here. Most of the methylation recommendations are heavily around foods related to B12s and folate, and then supplementation that can support that. So, but you're looking at which part of the methylation process specifically could use extra support. You can also see, and these are very linked, but is there a vitamin B weakness that's impacting health? And so vitamin Bs are critical to this methylation process and a common area of variation. Up to 45% of people have variations in vitamin Bs. And if they're not taking supplementation, and it's really hard to get it all through your diet, you can suffer issues. And so natural interventions for poor methylation: folate-rich foods, B vitamin-rich foods, and dietary methionine. Hopefully through your studies, you've learned about some of the foods that you can use in these areas. Again, nuts, beans, peas, seafood, eggs, seafood, nutritional yeast, beans, quinoa, etc. But you can also use supplementation, testing for homocysteine, and you might want to see if there's other considerations, like is there a history of gastrointestinal issues like gastritis, ulcerative colitis, and Crohn's. So just knowing that there can be other situations that can lead to compounding problems. Again, many of these issues are complex. So one final kind of area to look at here is just the aging cycle creates a lot of issues, and actually through menopause links to this adiposity, which is basically more insulin resistance and can lead to weight, can lead to cognitive decline and Alzheimer's. Really, when you lose these estrogens, it has a big impact. So what can you be doing to be protecting people about that? I mentioned this one because it relates to everything we've talked about so far, but we also have a test that relates to Alzheimer's and the ApoE genes and LDL cholesterol. If you know somebody has the variations in those genes, getting them onto a healthy diet immediately will probably add 10 years of health to their life. That's my experience and assessment. And it's so just recognizing that you can make such a difference. And many people are saying that having these ApoE genes is really Alzheimer's, like Alzheimer's 3 or diabetes 3. And it's really that diet can affect that pretty substantially. So just looking at our time, the very fast case study here. Nancy is one of our clients, wife and mother. She actually came to one of our partners with fibromyalgia, depression, inconsistent and heavy periods, pain. She gained 50 pounds, couldn't work due to the pain, can't even really help with kids and home much. Her husband encouraged her to try DNA testing because she'd really run out of options in the medical field. When we look at her results, these are kind of the core red areas. We can see big issues in hormones, big issues in inflammation, food tolerance, issues related to gluten, lactose, and salt, some protein need that's important, some body mass index, just, didn't inherit the best set of genes, I guess, some methylation issues. So when we see all of those particular variations, we're going, okay, the things that could support you we may want to look at a few factors around protein, Bs, etc. In here, just showing you the gene panel, we can see a number of poor genes. We might want to dive in to see if we want to look more specifically at those. Many of these we looked at earlier in the presentation. We looked at SOD2, ILS genes, IGF, NADSIN, and FTO. All of those mean a higher protein diet. She also has several that mean you want an anti-inflammatory diet. She's just going to have to work harder to stay healthy. And now you know which areas you need to support, and you've got the evidence that tells her why it's so important for her to do this. So what did Nancy do? Cut gluten and lactose out of her diet. She needed to get everything inflammatory out. Diet low in saturated fat, because that was creating inflammation for her. And she had been on a keto diet thinking that was the answer. Turned out it was actually really not good for her at all. And she needed to move to really more of a modified Mediterranean and anti-inflammatory. She started on methylated vitamin B, omega-3 supplement, also an I3C supplement, which is an estrogen metabolizer. Not something that I know a lot about, but this partner works with a lot of people in this area, and really just started to spend more time out with their kids to get some exercise. Within a few months, she'd lost some weight, had more energy, was feeling less pain, and cut her pain meds in half, and was really starting to be able to enjoy time with family. Interesting, because just before this, we called the partner just to see how is this gal doing. And she didn't want to spend money on the supplements and on kind of the coaching to keep her on this program. And so has been off of it for quite a number of months. She sent a photo. She's back in hospital with all of her symptoms have flared. And so she's right now signing back up again with this partner to work again, because she realizes she needs the motivation to stay on the diet, and to make sure she is really investing in that for her health. Because again, you know, we know that health is so important. And so it's funny that in this case, she saw that it improved, went off of it thinking I'm better, and her DNA couldn't quite support her through that without moving back to a much cleaner diet. So just overall, when people who do their DNA, a nutrigenomic study at Quantland showed that when you get this data, it helped 89% of the people who did this testing understand their health better. 87% became motivated to be more conscious about healthy eating. And 87% said it helped them take action to eat healthier for their bodies because they understood why. Working with a nutritionist, I find, is so key. People need the motivation, they need the help and the support, but it takes some effort. It is easy for you to use this with your clients. Really, it's a simple cheek swab. You can do it. We can manage it for you. Order the test. People send in the sample, receive the results, and we can stock it for you. You can stock it, send it in. We do everything on consignment so that you don't have to invest up front, but can be very valuable to produce this information for people. And if you find you've got some some clients that have done 23andMe and Ancestry, that can produce the results. They're not as detailed, but you get most of the information, and it's just a lot cheaper. It's half the price for people. So we try to make it simple and easy, and so that it doesn't scare people about doing their DNA. We also are fanatic about privacy. And so there is no buying and selling of data. There's no sharing of your data. And everything, we only collect what we need. So if people are concerned about privacy, we only collect what we need and only use that. And so what does it cost if you wanted to try some of this? The networking nutritionist rate that we have for doing your total power is $349, which is $150 off our retail, or you can do $50 off our diet power or $100 off the Connect. So that's the wholesale pricing that we would offer to you. Lots of benefits in doing this. It really creates more customer loyalty and trust. It gives you some additional revenue. You can get referral business. It differentiates you from other people. You're now using science to provide recommendations and can really save time and eliminate uncertainties with people you're working with. We do have a certification program for you to learn more. And so it's, I'm going to say 5 to 8 hours videos. We have a detailed textbook that you can go through to really get that certification to feel really confident about using these particular genes and data in developing recommendations. And for you, if you wanted to get the testing and the certification, we're offering it combined at $100 off. And again, wholesale rates. We love working with nutritionists. We find them just some of the most positive partners that we have. And we're always just so delighted to support you in your practice and to help you with any questions that you might have. Jalia is our partner manager. She is a holistic nutritionist, works with DNA. If you have any questions, you're more than welcome to use the Calendly link in dnaPower to connect with her. So that's, diving through just so many areas of how DNA and the genetic information can help you with respect to weight and hormones, fertility, menopause, inflammation, methylation, and working with your clients and supporting women's health and their health overall. So I'll pause there and just see if there's any questions.
Yes, thank you so much. That was great. We do have a bunch of questions in queue already, but for anyone else who's here live, if there's anything on your mind, feel free to pop it in the Q&A box now, and we'll try to get to those. But starting off, I think this is a good question to start with. Connie is asking, if someone has eliminated gluten for a number of years, will the gene expression still show as being sensitive to gluten?
Yeah, great question. So very important to know that your DNA information does not change from when you're born to when you die. It is your DNA program. And now it's just how your program expresses itself. So If your genetics show that you have a genetic variation related to gluten, it will not go away. However, when you test on a sensitivity test, that can definitely change. And so if you are celiac, the odds are you'll always test on a gluten sensitivity test. If you have some of the minor ones, you may or may not, the body kind of can build up some tolerance, but it's testing different things. And then there's many people who are gluten sensitive that actually don't have genetic variations. It's just the result of a weak gut. And leaky gut, IBS, overexposure to we have high amounts of gluten in our breads and our foods right now, and that's created a lot of weakness. Antibiotics can create some weakness. So you'd have to say, where is the source of the gluten sensitivity coming from? Is it genetic or was it acquired? If it's genetic and it's some of the more minor genes, you can probably improve over time, and the testing may improve on a sensitivity test, but it will never change on your DNA test.
Perfect. Thank you. Second, sort of similar question. The section showing salt metabolism, is that all salts, including sea salt, Himalayan pink salt, or is it just a table salt specifically?
It's related to sodium. So when they do the studies, it's sodium. I have a belief, I'm not a big supporter of table salt at all. I'd rather, if you need your iodine, you get it from other sources. I do believe that all bodies need some salt related to, because of the wonderful variety of minerals that come in that. So I am an advocate of that real pure harvested salt and having a little bit of that in your diet, and some of the Himalayan salt. But you do need to know that even with that, it does provide, it will still have some impact. If you've got that sodium salt issue, the person will be at a higher risk of cardiovascular and hypertension with that. So they just need to be more moderate. But I think because of because of how it impacts other can't think of the name when you're dehydrated and you need to get more
electrolytes.
Thank you. Electrolytes in your body, that it supports the electrolyte process. And so that would be my thought. Jolly, I'm going to ask you as a nutritionist, what's your view on that?
Yeah, just to reiterate, I think the question was wondering whether the genetic variations is testing or signifying that somebody would be sensitive to normal table salt versus, better types of salt like pink salt and whatnot. Is that correct?
I think so. Yeah, that's what I got out of it.
Yeah. So, I think my understanding is from the research papers, I don't think they ever actually isolate what type of salt it is. Our understanding is that it's just plain old table salt. I don't think that they're using pink salt to do the studies. So hopefully that answers your question. I think a lot of people do have questions around that. And definitely there's more positives around having different types of salt that have more mineral properties in it. But reiterating what Dr. Lois Naherney said earlier, if anybody does show genetic markers in those areas, regardless of the type of salt and whether it is more beneficial, has more minerals and whatnot, somebody does with those genetic variations still have to be a little bit more careful because they naturally have a higher risk of hypertension.
Perfect. So we have another question here, which I think will be a quick answer, maybe just to clarify the pricing for this option. For somebody who's already had the whole genome done with 23andMe or another, how would they use your software to get the reports for a smaller fee?
Well, if they want it personally, I would say reach out to Jalia and we'll just create another discount for you on it, because in the full package, we haven't done that. So Jolly, I think that would be pretty simple to do, right? Because we'll just discount it for that. And if they're using it with partners, what you would do is they upload their data into the site, or you would send it to us. When we, on our site, if you have people just upload their data directly, we do ask them to list if they're working with a partner. And if it comes through your link, if you set up as a partner and it's your link, you automatically every month will get a commission on anything that you've promoted.
Perfect. And that's when you showed the services before, you call that Connect. Is that right? Did I get that
Connect
right?
is we're connecting existing data in.
Beautiful. When you showed the slide where the woman was having difficulty regulating hormones well, and you mentioned you might send them to an ND for a Dutch test, would you be trying things to change their diet and lifestyle first to see those results first, or would you just be sending them right to the ND for those hormonal issues?
Well, I just believe that diet, an effective diet working with your body can over time fix everything. So our bodies are meant to be smart and to work, to do what they're supposed to do. But it's just so hard figuring out where something gets out of balance. And so it's when somebody is desperate, I would always work with diet and supplements first. However, if somebody's in a serious shape, then, it's a quick way to find out if there's a hormonal balance related to, estrogen dominance, et cetera.
Excellent. Is there a marker that you test for that shows if somebody would do well on a vegan diet or should prefer more animal products?
It's great. You know what? There's so little research on this. We have one gene finally that's coming into our panel related to, being, vegan. Yes, I'm going to say, of course, lactose, but you're talking about in general, plant-based versus meat in the diet is what I assume the question is related to. Yes, but really, it's just there's more research that has to come. We will have a new panel later this year that will have one variation in there. This is where I just say work intuitively with your body. So I try occasionally to be vegan, and with my vitamin B variations, I just can't sustain it for a very long time. And so that's not according to a vegan gene. It's really related that my bees just keep driving it. I got way too much Northern European in me. And I can't seem to manage fully, even though I'd like to.
Yeah.
If you don't mind me adding to that. Yeah, so definitely if you look at, for example, like our vitamin panel, we test for things like vitamin A, for example, where we actually look at like beta carotene conversion. And so if somebody was on a plant-based diet, that would be difficult for them if they actually had that marker. So that's something where it can identify like whether it is suitable for somebody, to be on a plant-based diet for those reasons. Aside from vitamin A, for example, as Lois said, a lot of the B vitamin genetic markers also can point towards whether somebody is suited for a vegan diet or not, because if you are having trouble metabolizing or keeping a higher concentration of B vitamins in your bloodstream, then that's another indicator of, whether or not you're more suited for a vegan or meat-based diet. In addition to that, there's other things like iron deficiency markers as well, vitamin D as well. So those are all like vitamin deficiencies that are common in a plant-based diet that you can kind of identify through genetic markers and whether somebody has a higher risk for that.
Yeah, I was going to jump into, just from my own experience working with my own genetics, also some of those markers for the carbohydrate versus fat metabolism. If someone is having a lot of challenges with metabolizing carbohydrates, which I do, a plant-based diet, it's very difficult to meet your protein needs without also having high carbohydrate intake on a plant-based diet. So I know that was a place of learning for me personally. So yeah, I hear you saying there's not one particular thing, but you can kind of cobble together the information from a lot of different places.
Absolutely.
All right, a couple more questions here. You mentioned a gene related to Alzheimer's. Are there any specific genes related to Parkinson's that would show in your results?
Yes, we have two genes related to Parkinson's. There's all of these are complex areas, but there are two related to Alzheimer's and two related to Parkinson's that are the highest correlated. So the answer is yes. We have two related to Parkinson's, but it is not a complete panel. If somebody is worried about Parkinson's overall, we can only tell them if they've got the worst two that are most directly related to that. We've had very few people in all of our testing, because we did a scan about 6 or 8 months ago just to see on the Parkinson's marker, and we'd only had thousands of tests, like only very few that had shown that. So
wonderful. I've got 2 more questions in queue here, and I do have a hard stop today at 7, so I want to squeeze these in the last 5 minutes. Jessica's asking, on a previous webinar that we had on methylation, there was some discussion about folate being a better option over folic acid. But in the specific folate cycle that you showed on screen, it did show folic acid there. So she's asking if you're able to speak on that a little bit, about folic acid being present in the body naturally and how those different forms would impact that folate cycle.
I'll give a quick answer and then I'll give it to Jolly on this one. So you want to be taking folate in and it converts to folic acid. You don't want to take folic acid in. So folic acid is not that great for the body. That would be my short answer, but Jolly, you're much better at that.
Yeah, I think if we go back to the actual chart and looking at the cycle there, you might have misread it. So I think what the cycle was actually saying is that somebody like goes into the cycle with folic acid, but then through the cycle itself and through all the enzymatic processes that it turns into folate. So what we were trying to say is that, yeah, with somebody with an MTHFR genetic mutation, you don't want to be actually taking folic acid. You want to be taking more folate because it's it's already kind of, I guess, biochemically available. So yeah, folate is the form that you would want to take.
Excellent, thank you. And then the last question I have here, it's a simple one, but I think it kind of leads to a bigger conversation about all the things you can use DNA testing for. So it just says, can dnaPower help if someone is affected by lymphedema?
I'm going into what I'm doing is working through and then what are the things that can lead to lymphedema. Anything that the odds are someone with lymphedema has, can't even talk today, has a inflammation marker. So the odds are high that they're going to have high inflammatory. I actually do not know the answer if there are genetic variations directly related to lymphedema. I would assume the IL-6 is part of it, but that's something I'd have to research separately. Anything, if you've got that supports, again, anti-inflammatory would be important. Jolly, do you have any experience with this one?
No, this one is it's a challenge. I don't know about this one. I've never been asked this or have, been approached with somebody with lymphedema. So definitely we'll have to look more into this one for you.
So when I saw this question, I was thinking of some of those markers that you have, like the one for salt, right? So we're looking at that electrolyte balance in the body. And then to your point too, Lois, with looking at inflammation, almost all conditions that someone's going to be diagnosed with have some sort of root in that inflammatory cycle. So regardless of the particular label that someone has, knowing how their body's dealing with inflammation can help you get to that root and actually address it, right?
Yes. Yeah. Thank you for that.
And I know we have a hard stop in 1 minute, but I know Jessica in the webinar chat also mentioned if we can go back to the pricing slides quickly. So Lois will just have to quickly share screen there.
Oh, thank you. Sorry about that. I've moved to the slide, but I'm missing you here. So there we go. Share screen. And I've just popped out. Let's get back. There. So that one is the certification.
And then there's the other slide as well for all the different products.
There we go. Okay, so if there's any questions on that, people are welcome to connect with us. Again, we want to support you any way we can. We're really flexible in how we work with our partners. We just want to be able to support you in any way we can. So delighted that you joined us today. And so thank you. And if we have any questions, please reach out. And Veronica, thank you for having us on Networking Nutritionists.
Thank you, Veronica. And thank you, Sabine, for coordinating this as well. And I just want to say thank you. If anybody is interested in becoming a partner or just learning more, happy to chat more. And you can definitely book a call with me through our Discovery Call link.
Beautiful. Thank you so much to both of you for being here again. This was really great information and very applicable to a lot of questions that our members had. So I appreciate you sharing all of this.
Thank you.
Thank you for having us.